Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1978 immortal classic, John Carpenter's Halloween, the Night He Came Home. Now, I have reviewed this film previously on my channel. If you want to see a longer review of that, feel free to search Halloween in the search bar, and you should be able to find it. This film has the title The Immortal Classic for a reason. I felt like I would be doing a disservice to the Halloween franchise while I am revisiting it if I did not do another video, at least sharing some extra or new thoughts on Halloween, as well as providing some opinions on the 4K release of the movie, as belated as they are in comparison to other critics and other people. I'm going to be late to the party as usual. But with John Carpenter's Halloween, it's one of those movies that has aged like a fine wine. It's considered to be one of the finest examples of horror and of a slasher movie. And I definitely don't disagree with a lot of the praise that this film gets and continues to get to this day. I mean, Halloween's one of those movies that I really do feel deserves the honor that it has gotten. And it's a genuinely special film. It inspired a legion of other type of movies. It really did revolutionize and kickstart modern horror as we know it today. And it also showed that you can create something that is genuinely compelling and powerful and successful with not a whole lot of money. Halloween was not a big budget film. It was a movie that was made for a really low budget, but you had passion from people behind the camera and people in front of it and the people who were working on the crew and working on the set, and it all culminated in a really remarkable team effort that created a terrific film. And it just shows that you don't have to have the big studio at your back. You don't have to have, the biggest budget to make something that works and something that resonates so deeply with an audience. Now, Halloween has a slew of things about it that are genuinely spectacular, but I wanted to cover only a handful of things. As briefly as I possibly can. So the first thing that comes to mind when I think about John Carpenter's Halloween is the score by John Carpenter. This score is every bit as iconic as the film itself. Even critics at the time, even John Carpenter himself, even the producer, they saw that this film really was elevated to the level that it ultimately wound up being at due to the score. Because the score is just so effective in terms of building suspense and ratcheting up the tension that without the score, the film moved at a really slow pace and just seemed kind of dull and really not anything that amazing. Halloween is a film that I personally feel you can point out to people who don't understand the importance of a good score, because you take the score out of Halloween and you not only rip its heart out, but you turn it into an average slasher horror movie, because the score, despite how good other elements are with Halloween, the score is really what makes it so terrifying. along with some other elements in terms of the story and some other particular aspects of the film's production. But really, when you get down to it, the score is really what creates the nerve shattering suspense that this film is renowned for when it comes to its last 20 or 30 minutes. But as good as the score is, if you didn't have a screenplay that had a compelling and interesting story, as well as some characters that you can engage with, the score still would have been fantastic, but it would not have resonated as deeply either. And one thing about the script I definitely want to point out is that it really does place an emphasis on mystery and intrigue, and that's to the film's benefit. You don't ever really get to know why Michael Myers, when he was a kid, flipped out and killed his sister on Halloween night. You don't ever get to know why he is all of a sudden this pervading embodiment of evil. And I think that is something that really does work because it taps into the fear of the unknown. You don't have to explain it with thorn colts or some other bullshit that the franchise does years later. The shape is more effective when you don't know how or why Michael Myers is this embodiment of evil. It makes it all the more terrifying. It makes it all the more unsettling because there are no answers. Because he all of a sudden is the boogeyman. I think, I think there's something to be said about not telling the audience everything. Letting their imagination go to work. And also allowing the unknown to take hold. Because the unknown is such a effective fear that we all have. The fear of the unknown and what cannot be explained. And I feel that a lot of films that took place after Halloween in this franchise, I feel they really did miss that. They really kind of fell into the rut and the predictable and sad route of trying to explain the unexplainable, and it was to the franchise's detriment. And I think that's a big reason why this film still is so successful, even with multiple rewatches and even after all these years, because of how it taps into that fear of the unknown with its screenplay. But I mean, it's not just that, it's also the characters. Dr. Loomis is a really strong character. He has some really memorable and iconic lines of dialogue. The speech about the devil's eyes, the blackest eyes, one of the best speeches that I can think of. It's right up there with the monologue that Robert Shaw gives in Jaws, which are similar in some ways in terms of talking about, black eyes, the soulless eyes. But they're different enough that they don't feel like they are copies or of each other in really any way, if you ask me. And not only that, you have the strong lead in Laurie Strode, who is a character that, in a lot of ways, you would say is the first Final Girl, at least the way that we know it, because she fights back. She starts off as being kind of wimpy and shy and unsure of herself and her place in the world. And by the end of the movie, she survives this night of terror by using her wits and using whatever she can get her hands on. And of course with assistance by Loomis. But the reason why she was able to survive so long is because she didn't quit. She didn't give up. And there's also a sense of fun to the screenplay that I really liked, that really did make the film even more entertaining. It livened the mood. It really helped the film and its horror not become stale, because it knew when to bring some levity into the overall screenplay. You know, like the moment where Loomis is telling the kids who are going up to the Michael Myers house, and he's all like, "Hey, Lonnie, get your ass away from there." Yeah, you know, stuff like that. You know, that really did help the movie in a lot of different ways, because I feel that the film really could have suffered pacing wise if it was just constant, non-stop suspense and terror and death and murder and evil all the way through. Because you know, I think there are merits to that kind of storytelling in a horror film, but there are very rare instances where that actually works out, because most of the time, if you're just constantly hammering the audience with horror, it's going to get old, and it's not going to be as effective by the time you get to the climax. So with Halloween, they saved the best for last, and I think that really does make this movie one of the best films of its genre, because the best is some of the best that you will ever see. So the slow build pays off. If it didn't pay off, then it wouldn't really be as memorable or as immortal of a classic as it is. But it pays off in a grand fashion, so the slow build works in the film's favor. And that also ties into the mystery element, in terms of, you know, trying to figure out, like, where is Michael Myers? Where is he going to strike next? You know that he's coming to Haddonfield, but you don't know necessarily 100%, you know, where he's going to strike. So you're just kind of, you're really on edge. Like, the screenplay and the story and the film itself does a really remarkable job of keeping you on edge throughout pretty much the entire movie. As soon as Michael Myers escapes from the institution, you're just on a razor's edge throughout the entire running time. And that just becomes an even sharper edge when you get to the last 20-30 minutes, which to me are some of the best examples of suspense and terror that you will ever see in a horror movie, because it's just so intense. With, you know, oh, you think he's dead, but then he rises back up like the Undertaker. And you can see, like, speaking of other influences, you could see the influence that Michael Myers in Halloween had on Mark Calloway, the Undertaker, in wrestling, because it's the same sort of thing. You know, you think he's dead, and then he rises up, you know, really quickly. And I love the use of having Michael Myers in the background to really just ratchet up that intensity even more, because it's one of those things where you know he's there, but Jamie Lee Curtis doesn't know he's there, or the other characters don't know that he's there. So you're already like, oh my God, like, get out of the way, like, he's behind you. And that really helps the audience become immersed in the intensity, because of the fact that, oh, there's that moment where you are ahead of the person on the screen. You know what's going to happen next, but you can't tell them. You can't, whatever you say isn't really going to be relayed to the person on the screen. So it's this desperation that I feel films like Halloween really excel at in sequences like that. And a lot of that is portrayed so effectively because of different technical aspects of the film's production. The editing, the cinematography, the direction. I mean, what hasn't been said about John Carpenter's direction? I mean, this is some really impressive direction for a pretty young filmmaker at the time. Expert use of tracking shots and really just creating the right amount of mood and atmosphere for this kind of film. And he also wrote the script alongside Deborah Hill, so he's very strongly responsible for the success of the story as well, the simplicity of the story, but also the effectiveness of the story, and how everything unfolds. And yeah, the editing by Tommy Lee Wallace and Charles Bornstein, and the cinematography by Dean Cundy, who would go on to become a legend in his own right as a cinematographer. The use of the Steadicam in the opening sequence in the film was brilliant. The POV shots of Michael Myers when he's stalking his sister in the house, and the use of other POV shots throughout the film, something that you really hadn't seen much of prior to Halloween. It was such an inspired choice by John Carpenter and company to use those Steadicam shots in that particular fashion. And also, when it comes to the editing, I want to give them a lot of credit as well. I mean, I already did, but I want to continue to pile on the credit for the editors, because when it comes to sequences like in the end, when you just see all these different shots of the house that are cut together, the house is empty, but you hear Michael Myers breathing, and you get this whole, and before that you heard lines of dialogue about how Michael Myers is the boogeyman, and he's this, this pervading source of evil, and you have the realization that he was shot 6 times, but then he got up and walked away. And then you cut to all these different shots of the house that are empty with this heavy breathing and the score. It just creates a really uncomfortable and unsettling feeling that sticks with you long after you're done watching the movie. This idea that this evil that creates or drives Michael Myers is something that is around us, that is inescapable. And that's just horrifying. It really is. And that sequence is so much more powerful because of the editing, because of how everything is structured in that particular fashion. And also features some really solid performances. I mean, Donald Pleasance, honestly, this is the role that a lot of people think of when they think about Donald, and for a good reason. He was just the perfect guy for this role. Initially, they were thinking about going with Christopher Lee, but then they decided to go with Donald Pleasance, and the rest is history. It's a very pleasant experience to watch him work with this particular character. He has this gravitas to him that is just so strong, and he just really makes the film in a lot of ways. I don't think this movie would be as good as it is without without Donald Pleasance and his particular take on Dr. Loomis. Other actors have tried. Malcolm McDowell is a pretty good actor in his own right, but he doesn't even remotely come close to the excellence that Donald Pleasance provided to this character. And of course, Jamie Lee Curtis, who has a bloodline of scream queens and horror heroines with her mother, Janet Leigh. And it was nice to see her really break into the mainstream and to really build a name for herself with this particular film. Because after this movie, she was in a lot of ways a star. She got a lot of different roles in other horror films, and you could argue she was typecast because of it. But unlike some other actresses, it seemed like she embraced that initially, and honestly had a lot of fun playing this kind of role and being this scream queen. She embraced it. She did not shy away from it, and I think that's a testament to how good of an actress she is. She wasn't too picky about it. She was like, hey, this is an opportunity for me to show what I'm capable of, and if these are the roles that I'm going to get, I'm gonna give it my all. I'm just gonna show people through these horror movies or these cheap horror films that I am someone that you can rely on, and an actress that you know should be taken seriously. An actress who has potential to be in bigger films, and that's ultimately what did occur with Jamie Lee Curtis as a result of her starting her career with films like Halloween. She really captured the mousy, shy, but likable nature of Laurie. Laurie was never a character that was annoying or obnoxious, like some of her friends were. She was a character that I think a lot of people related to and still relate to this day. And I think that's in a lot of ways the heart of Halloween. That you can relate to her, that you learn to appreciate and like Laurie throughout the course of the film. So when she's the one that's being terrorized by Michael Myers, the suspense is very palpable because you have built this connection with Laurie Strode as a character. And Jamie Lee Curtis's performance and how good it is what makes that character so strong and resonates so much with the audience. Um, if the performance wasn't as good as it was, as it is, a lot of that would kind of fall flat. But that isn't the case. And I'll give Nick Castle and some other people who played Michael Myers some credit too, because it's kind of a thankless role. You're walking around with a mask on, and you don't really have any lines of dialogue, but you still have to take it seriously enough to make this character intimidating and genuinely eerie. And I feel that Nick Castle and company definitely did that. The rest of the cast are fine. PJ Souls is a bubbly bit of energy in this movie, but I have to admit the attempts to try to make totally into a catchphrase got a little annoying and got a little on my nerves after a while. All I can say is you can make a drinking game out of how many times PJ Souls' character says the word totally, and if you decide to do so, you will be totally wasted before the end credits roll. But I can see why she was cast in the role. She really did play that role well. She has a personality to her, and that goes a long way. I was never bored with her scenes. She was sexy, but at the same time, she was also charming. So when she died, you definitely did feel for her. And despite the fact that the totally thing was a little annoying, that's just a little tiny nitpick. And ultimately, I still like the character and the performance. Nancy Kyes as Annie Brackett. Nancy, she started out stiff. This is something I've noticed with this movie. Her performance is a little stiff in the beginning, but once she warms up, once she really starts to break out of her shell, once she really starts to become more comfortable with her character and with the overall performance, it gets a lot better. So by the end of it, it's still a pretty good performance, but I do have to admit, it starts off a little stiff, and it takes a little bit for her to really get into gear. But once she does, she makes up for it. But it's something I have noticed is there's a little too much stiffness from her when it comes to her performance in the beginning. And I think that's probably due to John Carpenter, and he hasn't directed a whole lot of films, so he doesn't really necessarily know at that particular time in his career when to push a little harder for a little bit more authentic of a performance, or when to notice when things aren't really as strong as they could be. And then you have Charles Cyphers, who plays Sheriff Lee Brackett. I liked him a lot as well. I thought Charles Cyphers had some really good chemistry with Donald Pleasance, and really did help those sequences work, because those scenes, admittedly, there were some points in the film where things kind of slowed down a bit, and not necessarily in a way that I think was just the film like taking a breather. I just think that some of this stuff could have been cut down a little bit uh, uh, around like the middle of the movie, because it kind of gets a little bit dialogue heavy and gets a little slow. But that's really a nitpick, because it's only slow and dialogue heavy for maybe like a few minutes, and then it picks up pace again, and then it turns and it just goes screaming ahead into its nail tearing climax and lasts 20 to 30 minutes. So it's just one thing that I noticed about the overall pacing of the film. But for the most part, it goes by at a really quick pace, and it's really not that slow or that dull of a movie. And one more thing I wanted to mention when it comes to things that are really good about the film is, of course, the mask. The mask is a really iconic look, and it was a total crapshoot, because they didn't have a whole lot of masks to work with. They were on a deadline. They had this William Shatner Captain Kirk mask, and they had a clown mask, and they went with the Captain Kirk mask. They made some alterations to it and spray painted it white, and they created one of the most iconic masks in horror history. And a lot of it was just, the same ingenuity, the same ability to think outside of the box that the filmmakers were required to do and had to do to get the film finished. I mean, for instance, you had moments where they were like throwing leaves, like they collected like some leaves around the neighborhood, and they didn't really have a whole lot of leaves, so they were just like throwing out a few leaves every now and then and making the best of it with only like one bag of leaves to try to make it look like it's in the middle, in the thick of October in the fall season. So there was a lot of ingenuity and a lot of imagination, a lot of creativity that was on display, and problem solving when it comes to the production of Halloween. And that's a big reason why the film is so good, is because of all these different people, all these talented filmmakers, screenwriters, and cast members and crew who came together and had this collaborative effort of putting their minds to work to create something that ultimately wound up being a masterpiece of modern horror. And I also want to mention, when it comes to cinematography by Dean Cundey and Carpenter's direction and the overall story, Halloween is not one of those movies that really relies upon its gore or blood to shock the audience. In a lot of ways, it's more akin to a Hitchcock film like Psycho when it comes to its use of blood or gore. It's a film that, yes, a lot of slasher films would be heavily inspired by it after its release, but it's also not a movie that you had a lot of people that were like, oh, it's too bloody, or it's this or that. And it's also a film that isn't really the same kind of slasher movie as a lot of the other movies that were inspired by it. It relies more upon some eerie visuals and eerie imagery. Like the sequence when Nancy Kyes, who plays Annie Brackett, so when Annie gets strangled by Michael Myers in the backseat of her car, and the windows are all fogged up, and he just shoves her face against the window and the way that things are lit during that scene really create this ethereal, surreal, nightmarish quality to that particular sequence. And then there's stuff like when the boyfriend of PJ Souls' character, Bob, when he gets killed by Michael Myers, Myers stabs him in the chest and pins him to this wall, and it's all shot in the dark, so you don't really see a whole lot except for maybe Michael Myers' white mask, and he tilts his head like he's like some kind of animal looking at his prey, or just curious and just, wondering, what's going on in Bob's head as he dies, or something like that. And there's a lot of moments like that in this movie that really do show that not only was Carpenter a legend in the making, but also that you can create a slasher film that has a body count, that deals with a killer who's stalking teenagers and killing them, and you don't necessarily have to load it up with tons of blood and gore to make it effective. I gotta be honest, I love blood and gore. I love practical gore to death, but it's still interesting to see films like Halloween pull this kind of story off without throwing out that bloody bag of tricks. Now, I really don't know what else to say about Halloween. Holds up really well. Goes by at a good pace. It's well directed. It's got some good performances by most of the cast. It's got a score that's every bit as iconic as the film itself. And it's well shot by Dean Cundy. It also features some really good editing. And it's an iconic film. It's considered to be an immortal classic. And I definitely agree with that. Now, when it comes to the 4K release, the picture quality is good. I'm no expert, but for a film that wasn't shot in native 4K, I was pretty happy with the overall picture quality. It does look a little bit brighter. There are more details with this particular 4K release than there are with the other releases of the film. I think there's enough grain here. I don't think it looks like it's been messed with too much in terms of DNR. And the new audio track, I don't have the best sound setup to really show how well that works. But from what I have, it sounded fine. I will say this. It's a bit disappointing that there are no new features on here. They don't even put the biography channel Halloween: The Inside Story on this particular disc, which is a disappointment. And there's also some things when it comes to the features. It doesn't really port over all of the features from other releases, but it ports over most of them. But yeah, it's a little disappointing in terms of there's really nothing new. This is such an iconic film. You would think that there would be some new interviews, some new stuff, some new content. Not the same things that have been on Halloween Blu-rays for quite a long time now. But it is what it is. I would say, if you have a 4K player and you're a diehard fan of Halloween, you probably already have this. But if you don't have this disc yet, I would say it's not worth paying like a premium price for. If you can get it used or get it for like half the price, I would say it would be worth it. Because it is a little bit of an upgrade in terms of picture quality than the Blu-ray. But it's not such a significant upgrade that it'll blow you away. So it's one of those things where it's a minor upgrade, but it's not like this amazing upgrade in terms of picture quality or sound. in comparison to the previous Blu-ray release. And it doesn't have any new features, so it's not necessarily a must-buy in that department. Anyway, I talked about Halloween a lot more than I thought I was going to, but I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.